Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibiers. Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Hope you've had a great Thursday. No court tomorrow. Things are moving along much quicker than they thought. I think there were some issues with some witnesses being available. So I'm taking a very early flight home tomorrow to Greenville, and I'm super excited. I haven't gotten all my thank yous together. I do want to give a big thank you to Cam for your very generous donation. I appreciate y'all. Thank everybody else on Monday. So, music fact of the day, Kansas, Carry On, My Wayward Son. So, the meaning behind that song, one of the songwriters of the band said, parallel to my music career, I've always been on a spiritual journey looking for truth and meaning. It was a song of self-encouragement. I was telling myself to keep on looking and I would find what I sought. So, there you go. Now you know. First up today, Chandler Police Detective Nathan Moffat, who is now a sergeant, by the way. He was the lead detective on the investigation into the murder of Charles Vallow until he was promoted. He's been with Chandler PD for 21 years, and he responded to that scene of Charles's murder. Mr. Archibald reminds the judge of his continuing objection to this testimony and this witness. He's overruled, saying the jury has been instructed of the limited nature of this testimony. So his role initially was case agent. That's what he was assigned when he got on scene. And he walked through the scene after being briefed by patrol of the interviews that had already taken place. He didn't specify which interviews, if it was Alex on scene or at the police station. He did not see Lori on scene, and he did see Alex, but did not talk to him. He recounted the self-defense story about the bat and all that jazz. Now, jurors are writing notes during this time. Sergeant Moffat said that Alex told Charles to drop the bat. Charles said, "What are you going to do about it?" So Alex shot him. Charles had gunshot wounds to the chest and lower abdomen, and Alex went into the kitchen, washed his hands, put his gun in the room, and said he called 911. Alex said he did not know where Lori and Tylee were at the time of the shooting, which is all lies. We also know Alex talked about doing CPR. We had testimony yesterday that totally refuted that. Alex denied Lori asked him to stay several times, even though Lori told investigators she did ask him to stay. Also, Lori's sister Summer has said she was the one that asked Alex to stay because she was worried about Lori. The detective who interviewed Lori told Sergeant Moffat that Lori told her she asked him to stay. So you have those discrepancies that never were caught early on. And when asked by Sergeant Moffat if he was asked to stay, Alex said no. There's lots of objections by the defense on this testimony, pretty much all overruled. He said the trajectory didn't match what Alex said, and on the way back to the house, one detective was driving in a minivan. Tylee was up front. Lori and Alex were in the back. He said the conversation on the way home was very lighthearted. So they looked into life insurance policies and found out about Charles's $1 million policy. There was confusion in the beginning with the company of who the beneficiary was. Eventually, as we know, they found out it was Kay Woodcock, which is Charles's sister. Sergeant Moffat called on July 17th to the insurance company and said Lori had already called in trying to file that claim. And that was it for his testimony. It's very limited. And the next witness is Sydney Schneck. She is 26 and lives in Arizona. She previously lived in Rexburg, Idaho, and she was the babysitter that Lori found online for JJ. Lori smiled very big when Sydney walked into the room. So Lori replied to her listing on care.com, and they messaged through the app and eventually moved to text because it was easier. When asked if she kept those texts on her phone, she said she did not. So she met Lori for an interview to see if she would be a good fit, and Lori explained to her that JJ had autism and had some issues that arose from that. They met on September 8th, 2019 at Lori's townhouse. The interview went well. She said Lori greeted her warmly, gave her a hug. They moved recently, and JJ had tendencies to get emotional, distracted, and difficulty communicating. Now, Lori told her Charles had died of a heart attack and JJ was having a really hard time understanding what was happening. She did not see Tylee, but of course, Lori told her that Tylee was in college and would come visit to do her dinner and her laundry. She also said that Tylee wanted to be paid to watch JJ, which is why she posted this ad. That makes no sense. You're going to pay somebody who doesn't know JJ and his routines and his moods and not pay your daughter. But we know at this point, Tylee is not alive. So she said that she came the next day to watch JJ for a few hours. Lori was going to the airport to pick up Melanie Gibb and David Warwick. JJ played with the neighborhood kids. Then she called them in to eat. Then he went back out to play. So JJ and the neighbor kid got into an argument about sharing toys. And she said JJ got very upset that his friend didn't want to play anymore. So he threw a chair and an ottoman and he went upstairs to be alone. Now remember, JJ wasn't medicated during all this, and that makes a huge difference. When Lori got back, JJ was still upset, so she calmed him down. Alex and Melanie Gibb were also there. David Warwick didn't come in, I don't think, until maybe the next day. But she was paid and she left. And she thought this would be an ongoing thing to watch JJ. A few days later, Lori texted her and said JJ had gone to his grandparents for a month, but she would message her when they were back to arrange for her to babysit him some more. That month passed. Of course, Lori never responded. The state had no further questions. Archibald did come up for cross. He asked about September 18th. I'm sorry, it was the 18th, that first meeting with Lori and JJ. She was able to see his demeanor and personality, and he asked if they had a babysitting schedule set up, and she said no. Archibald really was just pointing out that Lori gave her information so she could take care of JJ on an ongoing basis. Lori never told her this was a one-time deal, and he finished with cross. There was no redirect. The next witness is Josh Wilson, who is the principal at Kennedy Elementary in Rexburg, Idaho, which was the school JJ went to just for a couple weeks. He was actually enrolled from September 3rd through the 24th. The last day he was present was actually on September 20th of 2019. And the school got information from Lori on September 24th. Now, at this point, JJ was dead. And she said they were removing him from that school and sending him to Louisiana to be homeschooled. He called Lori on the phone, and she said once he was enrolled there, they would have them call for his records. They weren't going to enroll him in a school. And there was a cousin with similar needs. So according to Lori, they were going to be homeschooled together. There were no requests ever made for JJ's records. So there were no further questions on direct. On cross, Archibald is up. He asked if he was present during the enrollment process for JJ, and he said yes. They have a special education program there at Kennedy Elementary. When he met Lori and JJ, Lori never said this was temporary, and the witness said his impression was that he would be there long term. He was surprised when Lori unenrolled JJ. There were no further questions on direct. Archibald did get up and cross-examine. What he really was trying to do was show that this babysitter and this principal both were under the impression JJ would be around long term. So it's kind of playing into this whole she had nothing to do with the murders. And I think really that's what he was trying to get at. Next, we had a Mr. Hill from BYUI in Rexburg. He's the dean of students. They use a student management system, and during the course of the investigation, he looked to see if Tylee was ever enrolled or applied, and she hadn't. They were asked to look for the name Tylee Ryan, Tylee Cox, or Charles Vallow, and they found no evidence, as we know. Judge Boyce said that we needed to discuss the schedule, which eventually came to be no court tomorrow. The next witness was David Warwick. And there was an exclusionary issue with David Warwick, and they're going to have him sworn in and questioned. So he gets on the stand. Lori was shaking her head and talking to her attorney, and you could tell she doesn't like David. If you remember back in that recorded phone call Melanie did for the police, Lori said that David was influencing her and he was dark. But Rachel Smith asked if he's married, and he said yes to Melanie Gibb for over 2 years. Now, what's interesting, he lives in Utah. Melanie lives in Arizona. They have a long-distance marriage. He actually testified at Chad's preliminary hearing and also to the grand jury. So the prosecutor asked, "Did you listen to any of this trial testimony?" And he said he did, about 45 minutes of Melanie's testimony, not for the content, but just to listen to her tone and see how she was doing. And then he remembered he couldn't listen, so he stopped. He said he understands he wasn't supposed to. And he said that his testimony would not be affected by listening to her. So the defense asked if they talked about anything after she testified, and he said no. He said he hasn't talked to her in a week other than a text saying she was going home after her testimony. David said he's been very sick. He just started antibiotics so he could be there. So we all probably going to be sick by Monday, y'all. He did not look well and he hacked and coughed a few times. But he said that she seemed somber on the stand. Now, he watched or listened to this on YouTube. He said there were a couple of links related to her on there, and the headline was like, Melanie Gibb testifies. And not only is Justin Lum now on the court record, so is Hidden True Crime, because that's where he listened or saw one of the articles. He said he did access other articles that day as well. So Rachel Smith for the state was back up and said, "Is there anything that you heard that would change your testimony?" He says no. The defense says it's apparent that the exclusion rule has been violated and they ask that he be excused. The state says they have to consider if any harm was done to the case, and she is citing no willfulness conduct and was checking in on his wife. She said he admitted it willingly and points out he's testified under oath several times and he's forthcoming. Archibald said there's a reason we have rules and don't say, quote, "Golly gee, I made a mistake. My bad." The reason we have rules is for this kind of a predicament. Not only did he willingly listen, he accessed an article on top of that. Now, the judge points out that David Warwick could be held in contempt. He said, "I'm not going to do that." He said that they could exclude him or permit a comment on noncompliance. Judge Boyce ultimately said this doesn't rise to the level that he should not be able to testify. They will do a sanction, and the defense will be able to make a comment on his noncompliance during cross-exam. So they have a sidebar, and then David Warwick is going to testify. Lori didn't look too happy about that. So his testimony, he confirms he's been married to Melanie Gibb for over 2 years. The jurors are writing notes, probably of who he is and that kind of thing. They first met in Arizona when Lori told Melanie to bring David over to meet her, talking about David and Lori meeting. They were at Lori's house. Charles had been murdered at the time he met Lori, and the meeting took place in early August. The other people there were Chad Daybell, Alex, Melanice, and Zulema, and some other lady that he could not recall. He talked to Chad years earlier over the phone prior to this meeting, wanting to write a book with him. But ultimately, David didn't feel like this was the right situation for him, and they never worked on a book deal together. At the house, they were sitting around a table, and he said Lori was an amazing hostess, fixing food, and they were just having a social. He met her again in Rexburg at the townhomes when he and Melanie Gibb went up to visit. He wasn't married to Melanie Gibb at this point. They were just dating. Melanie and Lori wanted to do a podcast with him, and he was coming up for a conference, and his son actually had just moved close by, so there were a lot of reasons for him to be in Rexburg. He was there on September 20th through the 23rd in 2019. We know that last day is when JJ was last seen alive on the 23rd. So he's done some Preparing a People podcasts, but nothing with Lori and Melanie Gibb. Melanie called when he got to Rexburg and said, "Don't waste money on a hotel. Lori has an extra bedroom," so they stayed there over the weekend. When they arrived, Alex, Lori, Melanie Gibb, and JJ were there. He said JJ was sitting on the couch playing with his toys. So David explains that he has a son that has Down syndrome and autism. So he sat down with JJ to see if he could make a connection with him, but he said JJ never acknowledged. And he was told Tylee was in college and wanted to be independent. So he tried interacting with JJ again. JJ had a cardboard box and he was kind of cutting out like windows and doors. Again, JJ didn't acknowledge David, and JJ did engage with Alex once, but it looked like a good relationship. And he also was seen playing with the neighbor kids. David saw Chad around 4 times that weekend, and Chad was trying to teach David about the gathering of the 144,000 and Satan having powers to possess bodies. And David's talking about this, and he kind of says, I don't know how far I need to go with this. But David told Chad Satan doesn't have that kind of power to push spirits out of bodies. David said, I was listening to him, but I didn't believe him, and I let him know that. That's probably why he was considered dark. But later, Chad met them at a property near a church. So it was David, Chad, Lori, and Melanie Gibb who met there. They wanted to tell them about the building there, which apparently looked like a temple. David said it wasn't there. We couldn't see it. So apparently, Chad could see it with his visions. He later met Chad near his house in Rexburg to a property that had 80 acres. Chad wanted David Warwick to move to Rexburg. And this was on a Sunday, and David Warwick made clear to Chad, I don't do business on Sundays. And he said he would drive by and take a picture of the sign on the property, but that was it. But Alex took him to the property. Chad and someone else came over. The guy that was with Chad was a realtor, and Chad told David if he had any questions to contact this guy who's selling the property. And again, David said, I don't do business on Sundays. Our next partner is Athletic Greens. I take AG1 by Athletic Greens literally every day. I gave AG1 a try because I'm always busy and my diet isn't the best, but I still want to get all the vitamins my body needs without taking a ton of pills. I take AG1 in the morning before my first cup of coffee, and it makes me feel ready to take on my day. Why take a bunch of different things when you can just mix 1 scoop of powder in water once a day? It's the healthiest thing you can do in under a minute. With 1 scoop, I'm getting 75 vitamins and minerals that help my mood, energy levels, and healthier hair, skin, and nails. It's delivered to me every month, and it's been the easiest way to arm my body with everything it needs to tackle my day. If you're looking for an easier way to take supplements, Athletic Greens is giving you a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Go to athleticgreens.com/whattheworld. That's athleticgreens.com/whattheworld. Check it out. Base is an overpacker's dream. It can be hard to fit everything in, especially when it comes to luggage. With Base, there's room for everything. Deciding between a few pair of shoes? Bring them all with Base. I've been traveling back and forth to Idaho, and I have to say, I have 3 pieces of luggage from Base. I love them. They are so easy to roll. The padded handle, the built-in weight indicator has been amazing for me. Base was created by actress Shay Mitchell to make sleek and affordable bags, luggage, and accessories designed to help you travel effortlessly while still looking fashionable. Right now, Base is offering my listeners 15% off your first purchase by visiting basetravel.com/whattheworld. Go to basetravel.com/whattheworld for 15% off your first purchase. That's Base, BEIS travel.com/whattheworld. He saw Chad before this at Lori's townhouse before looking at these properties. He never saw Chad interact with JJ, but he heard that Chad had a scuffle with JJ and got scratched on his neck, which I've said terrifies me because you think about him holding JJ down and JJ fighting to get up. Chad's a tall guy. I've heard he's 6'3" or so. Just terrible. David knew Chad was married, but also saw he was being affectionate with Lori. So David's like, how's your marriage? And Chad was like, I have no complaints. And he also said her time was coming up. Lori smiles and shakes her head no when he says this. He said that Chad told him that him and Lori had things to do. Chad said he thought Tammy would die by the time she was 50. Remember, she died at 49. And he and Lori would get married and do their calling of gathering, the 144,000. David said Chad was saying he was one of the 144,000, and that's why he wanted David to move to Rexburg. David said that kind of a sign would come from God and not from Chad. So they did the podcast on Sunday, the 22nd of September in Lori's kitchen. It was Lori, Melanie Gibb, and David. They were all on the podcast that night. JJ was with Alex at this point, and Lori said she didn't want to be interrupted. So he saw JJ around 10:30 that night. Alex came in the front door. He was holding JJ, who had his head on Alex's shoulder. It looked like he was asleep. And he took JJ upstairs and put him to bed. He thinks he heard the front door close with Alex leaving, but he wasn't sure because he didn't see him leave. He said JJ was sleeping in Lori's room that weekend, which is interesting because when David had his little nightmare later this night, they go. Melanie Gibb tries to wiggle Lori's door handle and it's locked. She can't get her on phone or at the door. David was sleeping in JJ's room. That's when he said he had one of the worst nightmares of his life. Melanie Gibb came in to help. She wanted to get Lori. She came back and said, I can't get anybody. He said this was in the very early morning hours going into the 23rd. He never saw Lori, and Melanie Gibb was never able to get her to the door. So Lori said that next morning when David asked to see JJ before they left, she said JJ had an episode climbing up the cabinets, the refrigerator. He knocked over a photo of Jesus. So she had Alex come get JJ. David said there was no scuffs or damage and nothing like that. He said he wanted to see JJ to give him a blessing. So direct is over. Mr. Archibald came up for cross and he asks if he and Melanie were divorced when they were dating. And he said, yes, they started seeing one another when David actually was in the divorce process. But Melanie Gibb was already divorced. By the way, David is a general contractor. So you can see maybe why they wanted him on this team, somebody who knows how to build buildings. He described Alex as a fun-loving guy, genuine, funny, and lighthearted. He learned Lori and Alex moved to Idaho through Melanie Gibb. The conference, by the way, he was in town to attend was a Book of Mormon conference. The audience for the podcast was mainly aimed to LDS members, and he said they made no money. They were there for just education. The audience for the conference, not the podcast. He said there isn't a group called Preparing a People. It's the name of events with speakers and vendors. David spoke because of his conversation to the faith. That's why he spoke at these conferences. And he said people have called him a visionary man, but he doesn't call himself that. He shared his visions with others. There were visions of secret combinations taking place in Washington, D.C., and he's given talks about secret combinations in England and Saudi Arabia. He said he's seen visions of Russia and China invading the U.S. and China and Russia defeating the U.S. in 3 days. He's seen visions of the U.S. being sacrificed for a one world government. There was an objection. It was sustained. Thank goodness. David talked about the nightmare, and Archibald said a nightmare and vision are two different things. And he asks if a vision is pretend. And David says a vision is when you're being shown things from the future, but not necessarily about yourself. Someone is presenting it and it's from the angels. It doesn't come from within you. He said the nightmare was just kind of adversarial, lots of fear and darkness and no order to it. It could have been from an angel of the devil. He said that he had that nightmare and Melanie Gibb ultimately wanted Chad to give him a blessing, and he hoped that would give him peace. He also said, by the way, he didn't wake up from the nightmare. Melanie Gibb woke him up. They were in the same room. David wasn't certain what to believe when Chad said Tammy's time was coming up and was short. David said it would be an honor to be part of the 144,000, but he was not seeking that. And he didn't think Chad had the authority to be a gatherer for that. The prophet of the church, Russell M. Nelson, would be the one to do that. He said he's seen the 144,000 mentioned in Doctrine and Covenants. John the Beloved was a close disciple of Jesus, and Chad said this is where he got his authority from. I think that was who he was in a past life. Wasn't it John the Beloved? I don't know, y'all. I need to go to church, apparently. The topic of the podcast that last night, JJ Was Alive, was about sanctification and proving faithful. The Lord will cleanse your heart and make it whole and give you greater faith. The audience for his talks were the Preparing a People audience. It was about preparedness camps and organized firesides where they would talk about these things. Finally, it's outside the scope. That objection was sustained. But the purpose of the podcast was to help build faith, identify stumbling blocks to faith, that kind of thing. When he left Lori's, he wanted to visit his son who had moved nearby. And then Archibald says, "Hey, did you call the police after not seeing JJ?" And he said there was no reason to. He said Lori was one of the sweetest, kindest, most wonderful women. And somebody said they saw Lori wiping her eyes after he said this because it's all good and it's all about her. So let's get a little emotional, but let's not get emotional, about things that actually matter. He said they were teaching, what they were teaching didn't match their character, talking about Lori and Chad. He said he left Rexburg very confused. So cross is over. Rachel Smith hopped up for redirect. She says, defense asked about dreams and visions. She said, I want to talk reality. Who carried JJ to bed? He said, Alex. What did Lori say about JJ the next day? She said he was out of control and Alex got him. The climbing, he said he saw no evidence of damage, no bent door hinges, nothing like that. Redirect is over. And it was lunchtime. So in the afternoon, quick sidebar, that's when they let us know no trial tomorrow. Bruce Mattingly was called to the stand. He's a detective with the Fremont County Sheriff's Office. January 3rd, 2020, they executed that search warrant at Chad Daybell's property. There was snow on the ground. Ironically, the kids were underneath that snow in his yard. The FBI ERT team was there. They gathered the evidence, handed it over to him for processing. That was it for this witness. He will not be released from his subpoena, however, so we expect more from him. And then FBI intelligence analyst Benjamin Dean was up next. He started in late March 2020 on this case. He was reviewing the tips that came from that press release on March 5th that showed the photo of Tylee, JJ, and Alex in Yellowstone. He also assisted in reviewing of data extracted from devices seized from Chad's house when that search warrant was executed. It was put on 2 Blu-ray discs, and he explains how he's able to look through all that. He looked through Tammy Daybell's phone. There were incoming texts addressed to her. Her name was listed as the user. The outgoing messages introduced herself as Tammy, or her email signed off as Tammy. That's how he knew this was her phone. There were pictures of Tammy with Chad, their kids, their grandkids, but all outgoing communication stopped after October 18th, 2019, the last night Tammy Daybell was alive. September 9th, 2019, the day Chad and Alex are allegedly burying Tylee on that property, Tammy's phone got a text that caught his attention from Chad, because normally their text messages were very brief. Just, hey, pick this food up. Here's where I'm going. But this was the longest that he found. And we know this if we've followed this case, where Chad says, he's had an interesting morning. I felt I should burn all the limb debris by the fire pit before it got too soaked by the coming storms. And then he spotted a big raccoon along the fence, got his gun, shot it, that kind of thing. 11:56 a.m., Chad texts Tammy, gonna shower now and go right for a while at BYU. Tammy waits till 2:47 to reply. She says, good for you. 2:48, Chad says, I'm back home now. No response from Tammy. Most texts were to the point. So he said this one really stood out. And also just the date, because he knew Tylee had last been seen the day before in Yellowstone. He relayed this text to case agents. Direct is over. There was no cross. Next up, Detective Dave Stubbs from Rexburg. He's with Rexburg PD. He was there on the day of the welfare check. They talk about Expedia records coming in for Lori. We did not get to those. There are certified Google business records that will come in, business records for Tammy's Gmail and her Fitbit, by the way. Lots of things coming in. His first involvement was November 1st, 2019, when they were contacted by Fremont County about looking for the Jeep used in the attempt on Brandon. The names given to him as people they needed to look out for: Lori, Alex, Chad, and Tylee. All those guys were connected to that Jeep. Now, he did some surveillance and saw Chad and Lori get into a blue car, and they were going to follow them to see if maybe they could find that Jeep. And they followed them to Idaho Falls. They stopped at a credit union, and then we saw a couple of pictures of them walking hand in hand into Hobby Lobby. He said at one point, Lori put her head on Chad's shoulder. So they found the Jeep and seized that on November 4th, 2019. Then on November 26th, 2019, that's the welfare check that was called in at the request of JJ's grandma or mama, Kay Woodcock. So they played the body cam footage of that welfare check. She says JJ's with Melanie Gibb. One brother's trying to kill her, so she's moving around. Lori complained that $1 million life insurance policy was switched. Lori said, "I look like a suspect, but I'm a good person." That was very telling. They get to the point to where they bring up Tammy dying recently, and they're like, "Oh, Chad Daybell, didn't his wife just die recently?" And they're like, "Yeah." And Lori's kind of just standing there with her arms crossed, looking really awkward. Remember, Lori said that Chad was a friend of her brother's the first time that they talked to her. Now, she was watching this on the monitor on her desk. He said there were things they already knew. Number one, when they addressed Chad, she said he was Alex's friend. They knew they were married. Number two, Lori said Alex was in the apartment and he was worried about his safety. The officer was. He said it was odd Lori and Alex were there, but Alex didn't come down to engage in that conversation. And at the top of the stairs, he could see movement, like a shadow going back and forth. And they were a little nervous. So we're going to see another video. That's the second time they went back to her apartment after they weren't successful in getting Melanie Gibb on the phone. And they asked for her to call. Lori says, "Oh, they're seeing Frozen 2. I'll call her and have her call you guys." They know after they talked to Melanie Gibb, she denies having JJ. She wasn't even in Arizona where Lori said she was. And so they knew Lori was lying. She also said Adam, her brother, had come to kill her for her life insurance. They knew Tylee never enrolled in BYUI, and she never made efforts to re-enroll JJ at the school in Arizona, and the principal did not have to drag JJ into the school in Idaho like she said before. So apparently she told the police in this interview she was moving back to Arizona to put JJ back into that really great school he was at, but she told the principal he was going to be homeschooled in Louisiana. So what did they do? They got the search warrant for all three townhomes belonging to Lori, Alex, and Melanie's. There was video shown as those search warrants were executed, and you see JJ's toys on the front porch. There were things in the living room. It looked like some rucksacks or bags you might have things in. There were some Amazon delivery packages on the front porch that were unopened. There were keys left. The garage had things in there. There were couches, tables, lots of gun, lots of plastic storage totes. So they go upstairs. Lori's room is all tidy, got a nice little comforter on her bed, but all the hangers are empty. And then they also see a printer in her room that had that printed out lease agreement for the storage unit that had a lot of JJ and Tylee's things in there. There was one master upstairs, and then the two bedrooms were down the hall. There was an empty box in the closet, a fan, a bedspread, a box with ladies' winter clothes, and the third room had a bag that had male toiletries in it, so clearly that's where Alex was hanging out. So that was it for today. It went really quickly with us not having court tomorrow. I imagine that we may pick up with him. I don't know that he was finished. There was no cross on that. So it seems like we're just flying through these witnesses. Now today, I think don't shoot the messenger. The defense went there. They were like, okay, well, these things point to Lori looking long term, because otherwise they really haven't done much at all as far as cross-exam. So they're making the state prove their case. But I'm going to tell you, the jurors are engrossed. Again, watching that body cam footage, they were a little shocked because now they know the kids were dead and they know what Lori's charged with, and they see her just lying through her teeth twice on this video. So that was the end of the day. I hope you guys have a great long weekend. I'm heading back to Greenville, getting up at 4 a.m. to hit that airport, but it will be worth it. So, and I will not be in court next Friday, by the way. So, other than that, I'll be here every other day. All right. You guys be good. We'll see you soon.